Go ahead, Garrett.
Yeah, and going back to what Jeff was saying, about creeds, and it kind of makes you think what exactly, how exactly are we defining a denomination, and if we define a denomination by, whether there is a creed, whether there is a synod or a governing body or whatever, I suppose that the label denomination doesn't necessarily apply, but even so, I think that, even without a formal creed, we still have, Harold did, I think, a really good job of demonstrating that there were many different tests of fellowship, especially in the, with the missionary societies and with the temperance issue, all kinds of different tests of fellowship that the individual churches applied. And in some sense, I feel like those are some kind of informal creeds, in a sense, where if you don't subscribe to this particular view, then you're not allowed to be part of our body. And so in some sense, I think that is a very denominational characteristic. And with the editors that Jeff was talking about, the editor bishops, that they really are the ones who kind of disseminate those views. And the unity issue comes into play when those editors disagree amongst themselves. So it really becomes a really kind of tangled mess at times. But I still see a very strong denominational characteristic, and it's really interesting to see that play out in some of the different issues, societal issues. And that's why I thought Harold's books were fantastic, and that's really enlightening in that way.
Yeah, that notion of, there may not be a real structure, right, real denominational, like what we would consider in other groups, but there's that de facto denominationalism. The elements of denominations that, even though it might not be in name, that it kind of operates that way in some respects. Steve, you're going to jump in.
I thought that Harold's description of the sociological definition of sect and denomination in church was actually very enlightening for me. We toss the words around, but and I'm not sure how definitive that is, and there may be people coming from different perspectives, non-sociological perspectives that would put a different nuance on those terms. But as a group that sees itself as part of a larger Christian church, I would say that the Disciples of Christ and Churches of Christ, as an outsider looking in, seem to function in that way instead of, and not as a sect certainly, but have that idea that there are Christians, they're part of a larger Christian Protestant movement.
Yeah, those delineations of sect and church and denomination, those are fairly standard sociological tropes, and especially the way that Harold uses them, which is partly why his work is so interesting. Is that he's a historian, but he is using the methods of sociology to try and understand the history a little bit better. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, all the books we've been reading, especially those who go in depth with Campbell, it seems like his vision was inevitable that the movement would become a denomination and have structure to it. I mean, he just sort of had that bent toward that.
Yeah, and that's really kind of the ironic part about all of this is that, and I don't know, if it's clear that Campbell. I mean, he's absolutely working that way, but does he see it that way, right? Or has he kind of like willed himself to believe that he's not laying a foundation for a denomination to enter another denomination to kind of enter into American Christianity, and kind of precipitating that in a lot of the things that he's encouraging, but not. Really intending to do that as well. Go ahead, Mark.
Well, I was just wondering if maybe the passing of time and the culture hadn't forced him to change his perspective on that, and especially in establishing the missionary societies and the colleges.
Yeah, that and I think that Harold touches on this. That by the 1840s, the dream for unity is one that looks less likely to take place. That people aren't rallying around what he's encouraging, but instead are kind of setting themselves against him and against both within the movement and from outside. Right? There's a lot of ways in which the publications, religious periodicals of other groups will attack Campbell and Campbell's views. Not all the time, but he'll show up in other writings as well, as people look at him as not teaching the whole truth, right, from a Baptist perspective or a Presbyterian perspective or whatever, or look at him as combative or any of a number of things that you would kind of resist or stand against. Any other comments? We've been having a good discussion, so I don't want to cut it off. All right, well, some of those things we'll come back to, certainly, as we get into these other texts. As we move on now from this kind of mid-19th century period, we're going to be talking less about specific individuals, simply because the movement is going in, at this point, roughly two directions, the disciples of Christ and the churches of Christ. But, there's also going to be, trouble within the disciples, or tension within the disciples. That's going to be an issue as well. And so to try and touch on important people on all those strands would be difficult. We'll mention a couple here and there, but largely we're not going to be talking about too many particular individuals from this point on. One of the things to admit, right, that is, despite saying that Campbell's not seeing this unification that he wants, is to note, though, that the movement does grow. It is a movement that a lot of people find favor with. He's saying some things that other people are feeling. In the 19th century, in a way, was very contentious among denominations, and I think part of that has to do with the First Amendment and the gradual disestablishment of churches. That even though freedom of religion was enshrined in the First Amendment, a lot of states still had in their constitutions an established church, whether that's the Congregational Church, the heirs of the Puritans in New England, Anglicanism in some of the southern states, well, not Anglicanism, Episcopalianism by the time of the post-Revolutionary War. There were very few states that didn't have an established church, but gradually that goes away as well. And so, in a sense, we see an atmosphere of denominational competition, and some of that competition was expressed in contrasting yourself to others. This is why the Methodist Church is better than the Baptist Church. This is why the Baptist Church is better than the Presbyterian Church. Right? And so there's some cooperation in some places. In some missionary endeavors, trying to bring about some social reform. The rise of what we call evangelicalism today. But still, there was a lot of denominational infighting. And so this message in the 1820s of trying to get beyond that squabbling to simply be Christians and move past that denominational division. That this ideal that Campbell and Stone promote, a lot of people found that appealing because of how much infighting was going on as people were trying to, gain adherence. You don't have the legal protections that some churches had before, in the sense of, you're a member of this established church, or at the very least, you have to pay your taxes, and that tax money's going to the established church. And so this denominational competition, I think a lot of people, even in these denominations, didn't really appreciate that. And so, the Campbell and Stone movements grow, and they grow in those decades pretty well. At one point in the middle of the century, and again, a lot of this depends upon who you read, you'll find the disciples, using that term like Harold does to refer to the Restoration movement, as the fourth or fifth, maybe even sixth largest religious Christian group in the United States. This is a sizable group at the time, and a lot of this, of course, is not so much non-Christians suddenly becoming Christian. A lot of it is gains from other religious groups, right? Baptists deciding to become Restorationists, Presbyterians, Methodists, other denominations deciding to, follow some of this Restorationist thinking. But certainly, of course, there's losses to other religious groups as well. There are a few people that are really persuaded by the Campbell-Purcell debate on Catholicism to become Catholics, and are very vocal and publish books about why they become Catholics and why they left the Restoration movement. We've talked before about groups that go off to the Mormons. Stone lost several people to the Shakers. Right? So there are losses to other religious groups, but there are also gains as well. And so as this group is growing, there is that development of what we talked about, the institutionalization of the Restoration movement that begins to take place, as you might expect. And one area of that is the development of educational institutions. We talked about the Missionary Society as institutionalizing. But a lot of individuals begin to become convinced that it's important to have colleges, seminaries, other types of schools that are meant to educate disciples. Right? Campbell's not just an author, he also serves as president of college, Bethany College, which is still around today. He'd started a seminary that lasted for a little bit but didn't go too far. Other people started colleges as well. Bacone College was the earliest in 1836. There was also Kentucky University that was started. It would later become a state school. The University of Kentucky was originally started as a disciples' school, but then it gradually became a state school. Out of that was spun off what was known as the College of the Bible, which eventually became Lexington Theological Seminary. Texas Christian University was started by the disciples as well. Right, so there's several universities here that disciples, restorationists start as a means to do a couple things. Right, educate preachers is what a lot of these were originally meant to do. Then also just providing skills and trades and other types of things, generally helping people to learn more about the Bible. There's all sorts of reasons behind it. But a lot of them started as preacher training institutes. Another way that institutionalization is taking place is the proliferation of religious media, predominantly print media. We've talked about Christian Baptist, we talked about Millennial Harbinger. Yes, that is the same TCU that almost got beat by Texas Tech. Bright Divinity School, especially kind of is as Texas Christian kind of, it kind of starts separating from the disciples to some extent, and the Divinity School kind of becomes the place where a lot of the theological training gets done. So back to the periodicals. Christian Baptist, Millennial Harbinger, Stone starts a journal called Christian Messenger. Harold mentions a bunch of other ones as well. Periodicals like Gospel Advocate, the Christian Standard, Firm Foundation, all sorts of publications. Some that last only for a little time, some that last the lifetime of their founders and die off when the founder dies off. Some that are still around today. Gospel Advocate in the Churches of Christ, Firm Foundation in the Churches of Christ, the Christian Standard in the Disciples, and then later the independent Christian churches. These are all organizations or periodicals that are still around today. And those periodicals serve a variety of functions: to educate, to inform. They often take a stand. The editors or different authors would oppose certain religious viewpoints within and without. Right? So against the Baptist thinking, or here's what's wrong with Calvinism, or within, right? And so this person started teaching this in churches such and such, and here's why that's wrong. And so a lot of things that are helping ostensibly to unite the movement by trying to encourage uniformity of teaching. But in another sense, of course, they're fracturing the movement as well, especially as they start attacking people within the movement that differ from them. And I'm not to suggest that that there isn't a time and place for taking a stand for truth. That if you believe somebody is teaching something false, thinking back to such controversies about Arius in the fourth century trying to claim that Jesus had been a created being. Well, yeah, there's times to oppose that, but the point here, of course, is that in trying to oppose these things, they're kind of fracturing the unity aspect of the Restoration movement. And so, that's one of the things that is interesting here from a historical perspective, is that, there's an attempt here to try and provide some of that structure, albeit unintentionally, but it's actually kind of working against that. Another place where division is occurring, of course, and Harold talks about this, is of course the sectional tensions. That's why, and when we talk about Harold's book, why his work was so important in thinking about the disciples and the churches of Christ, and why they split. That it wasn't just doctrinal division. It was about sectional tension. It was about the issue of slavery, and that this is simply also a mirror of other issues that are reflected in this movement. I mean, it's perhaps a little naive to support a view that everybody can believe the Bible the same way. as a member of the Restoration movement, I'd like to believe that's true. Is that we could all come to agreement on what the Bible teaches. But what I also see is that when you let people decide for themselves what the Bible teaches, well, they're not always going to agree. And again, as someone who really supports a lot of the Restoration movement thinking, I think we kind of need to let that happen. I don't like the idea of having a structure where somebody from above says, you're going to believe this. I don't like the idea of that, the sort of within Catholicism, right? The index of banned books. Right? Don't read these teachings. Don't think about these things. That seems like it also has problems with it as well. And so what you have, as Harold clearly points out, and if you've done any other reading in the history of the time period, both sides are appealing to the same Bible, right? This is Lincoln in his second inaugural address. Both read the same Bible. Both prayed to the same God. And I mean, I think that a lot of the slavery, the Southern slave owners' use of Scripture was false. I believe that. But in groups like the Disciples, where it's kind of everybody for themselves, it shouldn't be surprised that you see those kind of things as well. Within the slavery issue, as Harold points out, right? There's abolitionists, there's very strong supporters of the pro-slavery view. And then you have like Alexander Campbell and others who are moderates who, don't want to say that the Bible is against slavery because they see indications of slavery in the Bible, that it's not necessarily prohibited. But when they look at American slavery, they say the abuses, the evil that's in American slavery needs to be ended, but we're not going to go to the point of abolitionism. And so you have these groups starting to line up on sectional issues, on the issue of slavery, that are splintering this movement as well. And then there are the doctrinal divisions. And I don't want to kind of minimize how important a lot of those were for the people at this time. I think Harold's right that it was more than just doctrine, and that often a lot of the sectional and economic realities of these churches shaped which doctrinal issues they really held on to, right? And so that part of the instrumental music issue has to do with lower class versus middle class. Middle class wanting more respectability, to try and find their way in middle class society, where the lower classes, don't see that as a acceptable issue. Yeah, Mark, I think that he's, in a sense, trying to keep a unified group because he knows that there is division, and he thinks, from reading him and from reading what Harold talks about, I think Campbell thought that his position was the right one, that it should be a gradual emancipation, that slavery in itself should not be condemned, but that that slavery as practiced in the United States had a lot of evil associated with it. And so I think that he's trying to keep the movement together and not see it divide like the Baptists and the Presbyterians and the Methodists had divided in the 1830s and 1840s.